Okay, everyone, thank you very much for your patience. For those who've just joined, this is the webinar from Radio Systems, where we're talking about the skill shortage in the utility sector and the challenges around not retaining or attracting enough women. We're joined by a heavyweight set of panelists from Director of the Women's in Utility Network, the Chief Operating Officer of Wales and West Utilities, develop training, engineers, project managers, and we've also got somebody, former Rolls-Royce HR member as well with us today. My name's Dion Knowles and I'm the Head of Marketing at Radio Systems. Over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be hearing from each of our panelists. We'll be sharing research and experience, and then we'll be having a roundtable discussion about what individuals and organisations can be doing to affect change. Now, you're all joining here today. Thank you very much. Everybody's coming in on mute and with their camera turned off. That's great. If you do have questions, please do put them in the chat box as we go along. We've got a Q&A section at the end where I'll either read out those questions or you can unmute yourself and turn your video on and ask them to the panel yourself. Okay, so let's get going with the main content now. I'm going to introduce you to Sarah Hopkins. So Sarah, as you can see here, I think Sarah's has a video on right now. Sarah shares the experience that, did you know, a third of women are looking to leave the sector within the next 3 years because they feel unheard. The Women in Utilities Network have done research into unconscious bias and inclusivity. So Sarah, please do tell us more about that and about yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. So as Dion said, I'm currently one of the directors of the Women's Utilities Network. So that's kind of why I'm here today. I was also HR director at Wales and West Utilities until a couple of years ago. So kind of got utilities experience as well, kind of been in the coalface also. So I currently have my own sort of people consultancies as well as wearing that kind of one hat. So, but I'm going to really be focusing on the WUN research today. And I think it's fair to say, for those of you that haven't read it, it's on our website. So it's at www.thewun.co.uk. It's right front and centre on the front page there. And as Dion said, it's about research in the utility sector into unconscious bias. And we did that in February in conjunction with Marketing Pod. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the Women's Utilities Network, ultimately it's a volunteer community of women that have experience in utilities or mainly currently working in utilities, aiming to build a utility sector where women join, they stay in the sector, and then they thrive in the sector as well. And the Women's Utilities Network looks after lots of different things. So we run skill sessions for women that to help them overcome some of these issues we're talking about today, careers events mentoring and thought leadership. And that's a lot around overcoming the challenges that we're going to focus on today, that are organisational or perhaps cultural, but also that are kind of come from within as well. So we talk quite a lot about the inner experiences that we have, so our inner judge, imposter syndrome, and things like that. And then our Women in Utilities Awards, the first one took place in London last June, and that really showcased some of the best things of the sector. So some really great women that have achieved great things in their career, great role models, great allies, male allies that are from the sector, and organisations that are really getting it right. But as Dion has said, that's against the backdrop of stats like a third of women are quite likely or very likely to leave the sector in 1 to 3 years. And so when we think about that, that's kind of not good enough. And none of us want to rest on our laurels. And I know that's why everybody's here today. So diving a little deeper into that research, I think gives us a little bit more information on what's experienced. We've got a few of the statistics in front of me for those of you that haven't read it. So half of the respondents to the research felt like they were treated differently because of their gender, and 41% of women feel that they're interrupted or spoken over in meetings. And then 46% of women are hesitant to give their opinions or share their ideas, even when they strongly believe that what they have to say is valuable. And I totally get that from being in a utilities environment for a long time, and I'm sure we'll share some experiences later on. So some other little things that I think are interesting in the research. So women are much more likely to be asked to do admin tasks. And I totally understand that. Can you just book the next meeting in? Can you take the notes? Can you make a note of the actions and circulate them? That tends to be what happens to women in the room, not just in utilities. And I think we need to give it a bit of perspective when we talk about that as well, that actually this isn't sector specific, but we are here today to talk about what's going on in our sector. And in the research as well, many of the women that sort of filled in comments and gave us a bit of context really to what their experiences were, talk about that kind of tallest poppy syndrome. And for those of you not familiar with that, it kind of means that even if they reach the kind of dizzy heights of their first executive job or their first, operational manager role, they're the first cyber engineer in their organization or whatever it is, then they feel very much like people are ready to kind of chop them down and cut them down. So that would come from men and women. So that's not a gender specific feeling. And so at WUN, what we're really looking to do, so WUN is short for Women's Utilities Network. WUN, we're looking to support women to help them overcome the challenges that they face that are real in organisations from a cultural and diversity perspective, but also the things that are going on for them in terms of their own confidence. And I know we're going to come on to talk shortly around some more general diversity issues, just a couple for you before I stop talking, is that 74% of the top UK energy companies have no women in exec board seats. Now let's just think about that for a minute. That's quite significant. And less than a third of all leadership roles in the sector are occupied by women. So women often feel like they're seen but not heard in utilities. So that is something for us to think about. I know we're going to come on to solutions later, but I think just firstly, I'm really grateful to Radius for hosting an important conversation like this, because I think in terms of my first solution, so I am going to say one, Dion, it's about having conversations like this and being honest and open and not just saying that doesn't happen here, that is not my experience, that's not what I see. I treat all people as equals. I treat everybody individually. That is not good enough in terms of how we make a difference and how we change things. And I think the final thought is that actually when we are looking at a utility sector that is not as diverse as it could be in a lot, particularly of senior decision-making, strategic thinking positions, that means that actually with the challenges we face relating to net zero, ongoing sustainability of the sector attractiveness, clearly, which is an issue, that if we have a third of women looking to leave the sector, then that's going to cause us all a big problem. So it's not something we can afford to do. And that clearly we're not going to be delivering the best possible solutions for our customers if we've not got diversity of thought, diversity of decision-making, and diversity in coming up with solutions for our customers. So with my sore throat and the fact I need to draw a line under there, I'm just going to pause there. Hopefully that gives you all a bit of food for thought. And Dion, back to you, and I know I'll join back in the conversation later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Sarah. With that backdrop, we're now going to talk to Helen Ford. Now, Helen is actually the HR Director of Radius Systems. She comes from a role at Rolls-Royce, but Helen wants to talk about inclusivity as a wider scope, not just the women in the industry, but also bring it to an SME perspective as well. Helen, lovely to see you. Please do introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I think Dion's done a pretty good job of introducing me so far, but hi to everybody on the call. So I'm HR Director at Radius Systems, have been here for 6 years now. Dion's mentioned that I worked at Rolls-Royce. Prior to that, I was 24 years there. And I think it was interesting because I think the first slide said you've got experts here. I'm not sure I'd describe myself as an expert around diversity and inclusion. I've very much got a generalist HR background, but clearly a big part of my role is around how do we make sure that we attract, retain, develop diverse, talented employees in the organisation. So when Dion asked if I would be part of this panel, clearly I was delighted to, but I just wanted to kind of give that backdrop. The other thing I'd said to Dion at the time is, for me, diversity is it's in its broadest sense, and it's how do we make sure that within the organisation we create a fully inclusive culture so that everybody feels valued and everybody feels that their contributions are recognised in the business. And I guess one of my key learnings coming from a big global organisation to much smaller organisation, 2 sites, is just the approach that you take does need to vary. You've got to take stock of where you are as a business, the scope and scale. So in my previous organisation, we had the economies of scale where, and I don't want to jump to conclusions here, but you could set up networking groups. You could put sort of effective mentoring schemes in place. There was a lot of things that could be done there that certainly when I joined Radius, it's not as simple as going, well, I'll just replicate everything we did there. Doesn't work like that, and you've just got to look at the organisation to say what's your starting point, and actually given the number of employees and where you're based and lots of other factors, how do you make as much progress as possible? So, you know, I'm not going to go into detail about what Radius is doing, but clearly a big part of that is about making sure you've got right policies, right processes, right practices in place. But it's about also making sure you've got the right working practices, you've got the right behaviours and norms in place so that people feel that they can be themselves and perform to their best when they're at work. So I've not got stats that I want to share with you today. I think I've got a lot of experience in different organisations, and for me there's a number of things that I think we as Radius can make progress, and it's going to be slow progress. We've got to face the reality that we are working within a traditionally male dominated industry, and it's been like that for many years. It will take time to start turning the tide, so I'm quite realistic about that, but it's also about how do we connect into the broader networks as well, because we can't just do everything ourselves. We're not going to be able to sort of move the needle sufficiently. So I think, you know, from what Sarah's just said, there's some great opportunities there, and I'm sure we can explore more of that as the webinar continues. I think that's that from me at the moment. Dion?
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Really great to start moving to put it into perspective of the real world, because as you say, from a large organisation with lots of investment and lots of channels, it can be a lot easier to do. But when many of you here joining us today, maybe from smaller organisations, you're wondering, how can we drive this change too? Well, actually, we're now going to spin over to our larger organisation. We have got Rob Long, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Wales and West Utilities. And Rob has been successful with his organisation in making some change, recognising, you know, that it is a long road. Rob, I'm going to put you in the spotlight there. Over to you now. I'm going to put you in the spotlight on the camera in a second. Are you there, Rob?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. Yes, I can hear you. I'm just going to make sure that I can get your camera so that everybody can see you really clearly. Okay. Fire away. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on this afternoon. I think it's a really good opportunity once again to open up this very, very important conversation. So I'm just going to give a bit of context to what Wales and West Utilities have been doing over the last couple of years. Before I get onto what we have done, I just start by saying what we didn't do. I'd also say, as others have already, that that as a business, you know, we may be on the right path, but we're certainly and by no means reached the end of our journey. So what we didn't do, we didn't get swept up in the sort of tide for change and set ourselves up to fail. We've seen that lots of organisations have made broad statements that in particular executive boards should be 50-50 male female, but by particular dates. But they hadn't really understood as an organisation, why this was the right thing to do in practice, or more importantly, how to go about it. So whereas I absolutely don't disagree with the aim, I do believe that this in turn led to a number of businesses across the sector having to row back on some of their plans and rethink their way forward. For us at Wales and West Utilities, we did decide to take a step back, understand what the problem was that we were trying to solve, and whether a more inclusive workforce could be used to drive the business forward, and of course at the same time make us a more sustainable organisation. So starting off at the exec level, we initially engaged with business in the community, really useful organisation, provided us with an independent view as to where we currently were as a business. And particularly at senior level, this led to us understanding and provided us some clarity, I guess, that there was a lot more that we could do. And if we did do it, then there were some clear opportunities as well. And that piece of work at the very highest level led to two key outcomes. Firstly, that if we encourage more women to join our business, we get better results by establishing teams with more diverse thinking. And again, this would in turn lead to long-term established benefits. And then secondly, that Wales and West Utilities, as with all businesses in the UK, we're now struggling to attract people to our business due to the general resource shortages throughout the UK, and particularly post-COVID-19. So if you broadly consider that females make up 50% of the population, then we were unconsciously ignoring tapping into the great pool of talent that existed out there in the UK to help us manage the business into the medium and long term. So I guess that was a catalyst for us really starting to think about things. How do we go about it? Well, firstly, a huge focus on education. We initially took all of our managers into facilitated workshops, provided them with a very safe space and some brief initial education on the benefits of ED&I, and then sat back and asked them what they were concerned about. And after the usual, I guess, awkward silence, managers started to open up and discuss the topic. And one of the key things that I took away from those sessions was that managers in general understood the benefits of having a more inclusive and diverse organisation, but they simply felt that they weren't equipped to talk about it. And if they weren't equipped to talk about it, then they clearly weren't appropriately equipped to manage it either. Some of the managers were concerned with what language could be used. Others just felt, frankly, left behind with the pace of change. And you know, I guess when we got into the whole topic of what pronouns are, you know, that caused a huge debate. But you know, we won't get into that today. For me, the starting point and the most important thing was just starting the conversation. Sarah referenced this earlier on. Have those initial open and honest conversations, and you learn a significant amount about where your business is, and that basically provides you with a platform to build on. After we completed that, we moved on to more formal education, some specific ED&I training.
I think we might be experiencing some technical difficulties from Rob in the meantime. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your patience. While Rob weathers the storm. I can only imagine it's bad weather or something, whatever it is going on with his internet connection right now. We can come back to Rob later when we resume. Now, I think we've got some really good perspective from two ladies who've joined the utility industry. They didn't actually set out to join the utility industry. They went into had different career routes and then kind of shifted. First of all, I think Nicola, are you there? I know you're there. I can see you on video. I'm going to put you in the spotlight. I'm going to jump you up the schedule if you don't mind.
That's fine.
And then you can share your experience with the webinar. Thank you.
Lovely,
So,
thank you.
yeah, do tell us about how you started from your British gas engineer and how you know, first of all, you went into finance and why that came about. Over
I
to you.
did, yes. So hello everybody, my name's Nicola Smith. I am an electrotechnical and ACS gas quality assurance auditor for Develop Training now. I started at Develop Training about 7 or 8 years ago after previously being an engineer for British Gas. But before that, I worked in financial services and I've gone through complete different career changes. Originally, when I was a teenager, I didn't really know what I wanted to do and started working in financial services. I applied to a local college from where I was living at the time to do a mechanics course. And it wasn't something I'd ever particularly wanted to be for a profession, but I love the idea of being able to fix my own car. I've always been a bit of a tinker and I thought that would be a great skill to have. And throughout the process received an unwelcoming response to that. When I spoke to the college, they said to me, "I'm sorry, we don't do DIY courses here, darling. I think you need to find somewhere else." So I was initially hit with quite a negative response to that, which unfortunately, being 17, 18, I can't remember now exactly, at the time, I did let that put me off. Continued into financial services, where I qualified as a financial advisor and stockbroker. But after 8 years, I knew I still didn't want to do it. So I made the brave decision to be an apprentice for British Gas. So I left the financial services world behind me and I haven't looked back since. I worked for British Gas and was a smart metering engineer for them, doing electric and gas installations. Throughout that time, did receive different challenges, not all those that you would expect. I've mentioned to Dion in the past that it was actually probably less received from the older generation ladies than it was from the middle-aged men. I used to receive on a regular basis questions about if I knew what I was doing, if I'd done it before. Because of a generation thing, it was something that you would expect them to appreciate, a female engineer in the house, but it scared them more than it scared most people. But I did receive a lot of good support from the people that I worked with and from the company in general. Whilst I was with British Gas, you did, like I say, we had any issues from different types of customers that weren't as receiving as others. But then I did find that middle-aged men were more likely to ask me questions because they felt that I was approachable, and it was less of a pride thing, I suppose. If they wanted to ask technical questions, they didn't mind asking it from myself, whereas they might have been a bit more nervous to ask my male counterparts. And after working at British Gas, I then moved over to Develop Training, and Develop Training have been brilliant for me because they've meant that I've been able to work on a flexible basis. So they've supported me throughout my career with them, where I've trained and assessed electrical and gas qualifications, and now I audit the qualifications once the generally male candidates have come in and sat the exams. So that's a bit about my backstory, really. I'm not sure, Dion, if you want to go into too much else at the moment, or if you want to save the details for later.
Yeah, that's all good, because we'll come on to the panel discussion when you share your views on how we can make change. So thank you for that. Okay. I'm now going to invite Chloe. Chloe is a project manager at ING Contractors. Chloe, I'm about to put you on the spotlight when you turn your camera on. But Chloe, she had a similar story to Nicola. She didn't set out to pursue a career in the utilities industry. In fact, she was going to go off to do a music degree at university, and she stopgapped at SGN, and then that developed into a whole career. Chloe, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, brilliant. And we can now see you in the spotlight. Go on, Chloe, tell us all about your journey and you know, perhaps some of the challenges you've met along your way and some of the surprises maybe as well.
Yeah, so thanks Dion and Radius for having me on here today. Yeah, so as you mentioned, engineering was never a planned career for me and something I'd never really even considered. I'd always envisaged having a career in music and had planned to have a stopgap working for a year before heading to study music at university. So I started out with SGN more or less when I left sixth form, just as a temporary admin assistant in the office, raising permits and logging reinstatement. And it was perfect for me at the time because it was an 8 till 4 Monday to Friday job, and the office was less than 10 minutes from where I was living at the time, so it was ideal really. But as the months went by, I found myself more and more intrigued by the work that SGN did outside of the office. I'd managed to get myself on a training course which allowed me to work on a call out rotor, basically making standards on gas escapes and fixing meters. And I'd applied for a job within the business that was site-based as well as office-based, which involved measuring the location of gas mains when they'd been put in the ground. I was successful in getting that job. And it was from that point onwards, really, that I really got the taste for earning money and I was enjoying it at SGN. So rather than going to uni, I decided to try and make something out of myself in the gas industry instead. So yeah, fast forward to last year, I became a qualified NCO2 from working with a mains replacement team. And as of 2018 up until present, I worked as a project manager across Tier 1 and Tier 2 replacement schemes. The only difference is, as of last July, I now work for ING as opposed to SGN, and we are a contractor who carry out mains replacement within different areas of SGN, including Tier 1, major works, and we've recently taken on a new contract working with ULC and CISPOT also. It's certainly not been an easy ride up until now. As I was in the process of applying for a project manager role, at that point, there were no female project managers in that area of the business. I'd received a few comments from male colleagues like, oh, you'll get the job because you're female. And albeit these were jokey comments from people I worked alongside, it's still not nice to hear. Luckily, I'm not the sort of person that lets stuff like that stop me from doing something. So I made sure I had the best interview I possibly could, and I was doing it for me. So yeah, ended up getting the project manager job, and naturally there were more comments after that, especially from male project managers in the department I was going to be working for. And it did become really difficult after that, as I felt I had no support from some people I was working with. I didn't feel like they wanted me to be there and the job should have gone to someone else. But as much as I wanted to give up at certain points, I persevered. And one of the older male colleagues who was mentoring me, and I initially thought he didn't want me to be doing the job, he actually became my best friend at work. Once he realised how much I was willing to learn, he invested his teaching in me, and I think his mindset changed slightly. He's actually retired now, but he's still one of my close friends, and we meet for breakfast and coffee, and we still speak about work. So yeah, as much as it's been difficult and there's been challenges to get where I am today, more of which I'm sure we'll touch on shortly, there have been lots of positives, and with like very supportive people I've worked with also. There are things I think that can be done to make it easier for women in the utilities industry, but ultimately there's so many different roles within engineering. It's not necessarily just working out on the road or working in the mud. If people actually realised how many jobs are out there in the engineering sector and all it encompasses, I think many more females would be much more open into considering it as an engineer, as a career even, sorry. But yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. What a really nice story about how you really persevered and then you'd changed the whole perspective of your former colleague and now friend. Thanks for sharing that. Now I think we've got Rob back now. Rob, I'm going to see if you're able to join us again. Hopefully the storm has passed. I'm assuming you've had a storm.
Can you hear me now?
I'm going to put you back in the spotlight. There we go.
So just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. We can see
Good.
you.
And I think I dropped out at the point I was just starting to talk about the DISC program. Is that
Yes,
about right?
you've gone into talking about formal education. That was the point. Yeah.
Yeah, well, just to close off the education piece, certainly by no means everything we've done, but we as an organisation, we found that DISC was something which resonated right the way down through the business as well. And you know, when I ever get the opportunity to get out and speak to groups of people around our organisation, they always refer to how good this was for us as an organisation and how it's enabled them to understand their own personality styles, but most importantly, everyone else's in their team as well. So, you know, I guess some of the more dominant styled individuals have better understanding now of when to stop and listen to the more conscientious or
Do you want to explain quickly what the DISC profiling is, Rob? Because I know I have, because I've been through it, but not everybody will be aware of what DISC profiling is as a training exercise within organisations.
It's a very well structured profile of an individual's personal styles. Now, it's not so much about how you behave, so it ignores learned behaviour. It's what your own personal preference is, and it breaks it up. The DISC is effectively four quadrants, and what it enables you to do, it doesn't necessarily put you into one box. It could say, well, you could have a dominant streak in you, but you could also be influential. You could have be a steady as you go employee, but also be conscientious as well. So, and the key thing, what we found within our organisation is when people got their individual profiles, we were all asked to just run down through the sort of computer-generated profile of you individually and tick off what you didn't agree with, and none of us could tick off anything. And of course, look, that's fine as an individual, but what we used it for then, with the agreement of everyone who attended the sessions, was to use them to understand everyone else's profile, so they could then influence their own personal behaviours in how they're dealing with other people within the group as well. So yeah, it's been look, Google DISC and you'll see exactly what it's about. Is that okay, Dion?
Yeah, that's great. I've just dropped a link in there for people who don't know what DISC is about. If you search it on any of the social medias and stuff, you can find out all about the different quadrants and how you might fit into that. It's quite fascinating.
Sarah Hopkins is far more qualified than me to get into any more detail about how it all came about. So I'm just going to move on briefly then to, outside of education, we then gave a lot of focus to recruitment and retention. With regard to retention, we started off by simply levelling up a number of our key policies to both outwardly and internally demonstrate to our business that we were serious about inclusion. And I guess as an example, we did things like increasing paternity leave. We introduced bank holiday exchanges. We levelled up things like adoption leave. All small things, but all things done to support the retention of women within our business. And then we've also set up 3 colleague networks. We've got a good sized business, so we're able to do that. And that's the aim of that, is to provide women with a safe space and I guess a community to share thoughts. And those colleague networks have now matured enough that we're actually posing particular questions to those networks and the group of people who attend those networks, including men as well, by the way, are in turn helping us support and direct our ongoing strategy around inclusion. So it's been really successful. On recruitment, specifically, outside of the obvious things that we would do, like school recruitment campaigns, etc., we've completely revisited how we go about attracting people into our business. If you looked at one of our glossy business adverts, recruitment adverts, campaigns, whatever you want to call them, a couple of years ago, the first thing you would see would be an 18 stone in weight white male dressed up in company PPE, Ray-Bans on, arms folded, looking pretty darn menacing. And of course, what we were subconsciously doing was defining the type of person that we might be interested in recruiting, which of course is completely wrong. So we removed all of that stuff. But one of the main changes that we have made is in the advert itself, and this was in the area of role requirements. Most of our job descriptions have or had a list of between 8 and 10 applicants should be able to demonstrate experience in type headings. Our experience, and I believe this is supported by a professional view as well, is that if a woman sees a list of 10 things she must demonstrate, then she'll work through the list and tick them off progressively, and she might get to 8 out of 10 things that she can do. But if she can't do or isn't think she's competent in the final 2, she would have a tendency to roll back and back away from applying for the job. Conversely, a man would be happy ticking off 5 of the 10, and then frankly taking a punt at the interview that he might get away with it. So we've really narrowed the focus of the must-have requirements, right the way down to the values that we want people to demonstrate and live by within our business. And some of the other things, some of the other must-haves have now dropped down to the sort of nice-to-have area of the advert. So simple strategies that can have a real impact on the number of female applicants we've been getting through the door. So just to round it off, I guess the obvious question is, okay, if you've done all this work, you know, bearing in mind, I said right at the outset, we're on a journey here, we're nowhere near the end. A couple of key stats on what it's done so far for us as an organisation. So last year we've experienced a increase in female recruits by 60%, and that's a year-on-year increase. Probably more importantly, our retention of women, we've experienced 50% less female leavers over the last 12 months than we did in the previous 12 months. Really quite excitingly, this links back to the point I made right at the start regarding making sure that we get women through the ranks and up into the senior management positions of the organisation. In our latest cohort for our internal leadership programme, for the first time ever, 50% of the attendees are women now, and I think that's a really good place to be. And then right down at the grassroots level, we've just completed our latest apprentice and graduate intake, and 23% of new entrants into our organisation are now women. So hope you can see from there that it's starting to have a steady impact. And over the coming years, one thing that we do know is that within the space of about 5 to 10 years, approximately 40% of our management and senior management will exit the business. So by bringing people, bringing women in at grassroots, allowing them to effectively learn the business, we're going to be presenting them with some real opportunities to get to some senior positions within our organisation in the not too distant future. So yeah, hopefully that's given you a feel for some of the things we're doing. Clearly pick up any questions on all of that later on. Dion, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Now, just before you do go, you've obviously talked about this from a senior management position and your organisation, but of course you are the only male on the panel here, so I do need to ask the question. What are the big concerns from a male standpoint that you've experienced from your colleagues? Because I know I've been around and spoken to people both in my organisation, other organisations, and I've certainly come up against some ones that I knew about and some that were quite interesting. How would you? What's your perspective on that?
I think it's probably two key things for me. One is the knowledge of the whole area. As I said earlier, some of the men in our organisation were nervous to discuss the issue because of fear of saying something they shouldn't or offending someone. So you know that initial education piece we did right at the outset was a real kickstart for us as an organisation. I think the other thing, I think it's also very probable that with all of the focus on equity around businesses at the moment, that men could be concerned that women are taking a priority over them. So it's important to get across that we're doing this to ensure equity and the benefits to an organisation of equity is very important. And of course, if we get equity right and explain why we're doing it, then we open up a pool of people applying for jobs within our business, as well as supporting retention. So I think both of these issues can be overcome simply by starting the conversation and continuing to make this sort of conversation normal across businesses within our sector as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I know when I spoke to people and I said, look, I'm doing this webinar. Can you give me your honest opinions? Men, I particularly approached men, how you feel about the topic. And immediately they kind of clammed up and went, oh, you're not going to tell HR, are you? And I was like, look, I just want you to be honest. Really, how do you feel about it? Because we need to engage men in this topic. I know it's about getting more women in here, and it's and we've predominantly got women as the audience today, but the change has to also be driven to a degree by everybody. So now this is the time where we've got the round table, and this is where we get to the real substance. I mean, not that we've had loads of substance, but we start talking about what can we do to make that incremental change. I think it's quite clear that we're not going to get this overnight. This is it's entrenched in society. It's not something that you can click your fingers and get there. So I'm going to invite all the speakers back, and I'm going to spotlight all of you so that we can each participate in the discussion where we, first of all, I want to think about what can individuals, first of all, me, you, my colleague next door, what can we each as persons, not the HR team or the organisation, what can we start doing tomorrow, today, when we come out of this webinar to make that difference? Rob, maybe as you're already there in the spotlight, you've already highlighted some of those, but you could, I'll let you get started maybe.
Encourage people to get involved in the conversation. That would be the absolute starting point. You will go nowhere unless you hold open and honest conversations. I can tell you now, some of the things that you will hear as organisations, which you might have thought, well, that's a bit, that's a bit of a 1990s attitude. You have to effectively suck it up and work through it, because that is how people think. And if that is how they're thinking, that just demonstrates their base level of education within this space. So you've got to determine what your starting position is, otherwise you won't get anywhere. So encourage people to join those groups and talk about it.
Great, thanks for that, Rob. Who wants to go next with their contribution to thinking about individuals now?
I'm happy to, if you like. I think my sort of top tips to add to what Rob said is going back to the WUN research is don't speak over other people in meetings. I know it's easier said than done in the natural conversation, but if you recognise that you've interrupted somebody or you see somebody being interrupted, and that's not a gender issue, it's a behaviour issue, look out and make sure people have the opportunity to speak up when they have something to say. And then I guess that just rolls into behaviours and sort of thinking about your own behaviours and how you operate in work, and calling other people out, safe, finding things to put in your tool bag, your sort of management or employee colleague tool bag, as opposed to your operational tool bag, to pull out when you see sort of bad behaviours, and being able to call that out, I would think is one thing everybody could do differently from today.
Yeah, off the back of that as well, from being a female engineer and having seen it from both sides, I've had incredibly supportive staff members that I've worked alongside, but equally then ones that have said to me, fair play, Nick, I didn't think women could ever be any good at this job. And in their mind, that was an encouraging thing to say, because they thought they were saying, well done, you've done better than I expected. And that's how I took it, because I knew what he meant by it. But then there's other people who really genuinely want you to do well and want you to succeed. And I think it's giving the people the right mentors, putting them in the right positions with the right people around them to allow them to succeed. And then equally, like Sarah said, standing up to the ones that aren't in the right positions, because this was a senior mentor that we had who felt that a woman could never be any good at the job, and he was the one that was signing off my qualification at the end of my apprenticeship. But he did own it, and he said, I'm sorry, I didn't think you could ever be any good at this job, and you're better than some of the blokes that we've got. So like I say, it's just backing up the ones that are really supportive and being able to call out the ones that aren't as well, making sure that they're in the right roles.
Yeah, I'll add something completely different to that. So naturally, obviously, in this sort of industry, it is predominantly males. For a female to come into the project manager's role, like myself, well, most males that come up into that role, they come from an engineering background, like an off the tools background. Like some females do, don't get me wrong, but a lot of females coming into the role don't come into it with the off the tools backgrounds. What I would say to females is, if you get the opportunity to take up a role like you have myself, then push yourself to get as much engineering knowledge as you can, because I went out and I did like my service lane, but I pushed for that. Obviously, because SGN at the time, there wasn't many female project managers. Like, there's no real difference in training program for a female than there is a male. So I found that quite difficult when I came into the role, that I was just sort of expected to just pick stuff up naturally, like someone that had come off the tools. But that obviously wasn't the case for me. So I pushed to go out on the tools and pushed to do my service lane, but it's not always that wouldn't have been an option for me. So especially for companies as well, I do think if there's females coming into those sorts of roles, there needs to be a slightly different take on training for women.
I would add to that, Dion, that I completely agree that having the right conversations is the starting point. But if I kind of reflect back, I think there is a bit of kind of people can help themselves and educate themselves as well. A few years ago, I did unconscious bias quiz, if you like. And, I started that thinking, well, I've worked in HR for years. I've got quite a diverse family and diverse group of friends. I'm not biased at all. And I was quite surprised with the results, actually. And I think you kind of take for granted that because you're in a particular role, or because of kind of your friendship groups or whatever, that's how you think all of the time. And I think, there is a bit of kind of actually really need to look internally at yourself as well, and recognize that we've all got things to learn here, and potentially changes to behavior as well.
I'm going to have to say this, Dion, even though I'm not here for this purpose, but join the Women's Utilities Network. You can join it as an individual. It's free. There's loads of great resources to do all of those things we've just been talking about. And, you know, whether you're a man or a woman, you can join, you can be part of the community, you can mentor. And so there's a lot of ways that you can educate yourself, as Helen says, learn a bit more about yourselves, as Rob talked about with DISC in that respect, but also by sharing across, you know, other like-minded people in the sector.
Great, thank you. Well, actually, Rob, I want to go back to something that you mentioned on the phone to me the other day when we were chatting about this. You said you should treat people how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. And that really got me thinking, actually, because I thought that is so true. Because lots of people go, well, yeah, that's how I'd like it to be, so it's fine. And it's very, very different about how different people see the world and trying to put yourselves in their shoes, with their challenges.
Absolutely.
Right, so we talked about individuals, and I think now let's talk about organisations. Not too much HR-y, I suppose, because we've got people different. We've not just got HR audience here, but what can managers, I suppose, and be doing as well to support this change? Who wants to start us off?
I think for myself, from my role, one of the main things that led me to leave British Gas and to move to develop training was the lack of flexibility and the lack of options moving forward. So for myself as an engineer, the idea that I would then potentially want to reduce my hours when I had my children and maternity leave and flexible working, they were just non-existent options to me. Whereas at Develop Training, they've been so supportive. They've allowed me to reduce my hours when I needed to, then increase my hours when the options became available. I've done antisocial working hours and flexible working hours around my family. And now that we're coming out the other side of that, they're actually supporting me at the moment at looking at the options of working term time. And that just would not have been possible when I was an engineer at British Gas. None of those options, whether it was the flexible working, the reduced hours, it just didn't seem that any of those options could have been available to me. Had they have been, I might have stayed as an engineer working for them. But it was polar opposites, I suppose, whereas Develop couldn't have done more to make it work for me because they valued my experience and my input as their only female engineer in the workforce. So it's those kind of changes and making sure that we're aware of the options that are available. And if we know that there is a lack of those within the companies that you work within, it's what we can accommodate and what possible options. Even you might not be able to go to term time working, but is there any sort of flexibility and can we make that known so that more people are likely to apply and are likely to stick around as well?
I think there was an interesting thing you mentioned to me, Nicola, was about the way processes sometimes prevent that occurring when you're ordering things onto your van and stuff like that. You've got to be in on a certain date and
if you weren't in for
that process.
You weren't in for 3 days of the week, that your just stock wouldn't get redelivered to your van the next week on the Monday morning. It wouldn't trigger, even if you were on holiday. So the idea that I would only work 2 days a week, I would just never, my van would never get replenished with any of the stuff that I needed. It just wasn't an option, unfortunately.
I think it's a really good couple of examples there, Nicola, about barriers. So I think my ask of organisations would be to think about how you remove barriers, and whether it's the examples that Rob used around recruitment language and barriers to entry into the sector, or whether it's barriers to working flexibly. So it's how do we find a way to say yes to what people need, because we don't know everybody's stories. Not everybody's going to come and tell us what their story is and why they need to only work 2 days a week, or why they can't start work before 9:30. And that isn't necessarily always a conversation we need to have. We just need to find a way to match the work that we have with the good people that we have, and I think that goes back to the point of treating people as they need and want to be treated, not treating people as you think you should be treated. And it just shakes off some of those historical shackles that we have about the way that work is meant to be. You know, they say, don't we, in the press recently, work was designed, you know, the typical thing from 9 to 5 in a traditional family, and I say that in inverted commas, and obviously with the historical context that it means of a woman, you're staying at home looking after children, and a man going out to work 9 to 5. That's not the world that any of us live in anymore, rightly so. So we have to find ways to shake that down and be more flexible and reflective of the world we work in these days.
That's spot on. I mean, as part of our organisation, we run a 24/7 emergency service with a significant amount of people engaged in it. And you'd think in that environment, the working day would be fairly rigid. Well, actually, when you look into it, you can provide an enormous amount of flexibility to suit individuals' needs, even in that complex environment. The thing you have to do is go into it with an open mind and go searching for the answer, as opposed to sort of putting up the blockers to say, oh, we can't do it because of this, or we can't do it because this is the way we've always done it, or whatever. Yeah, even in those environments, which is the most difficult, I think, environment to manage significant flexibility, it can be done. So if it can be done there, you know, you take some convincing that it can't be done anywhere else in your organisation as well.
Nice example. Thanks, Rob. Any more to add on organisations before we start to think about education and society as a wider scope?
Sorry,
Me,
I dive
just
in.
as I.
It's all right.
Sorry, go on, Chloe, please.
Oh, you sure? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on what I said previously about obviously females coming into the role and not having an engineering background, but I do genuinely feel like companies need to bring something in where if there's people that are coming not off the tools into a management role, then there needs to be some form of engineering training with that. Because like I said before, had I not pushed for that, like me being a project manager, I get asked questions all the time from teams, and half of the questions I get asked now, like, I genuinely don't feel like I would have been able to answer had I not been on the tools and done some engineering training myself. And I feel a lot of project managers coming in now are just not getting that engineering training, and I think that does cause some stress for women in the role. Like, it's just not a nice experience when they're asked stuff and they can't genuinely answer questions.
Great point. All right, so Rob, you were going to carry on there, weren't you?
Only very briefly. I think listening to your story, Chloe, about how you've progressed, we're lucky to have a number of people within our organisation who follow the same path as you. And actually, if they come back to the question of what can organisations do, I'm sure that within all organisations there will be pockets where teams, sub-teams are made up either through design or luck of a diverse population. We've seen it with our organisation. When you actually look at the performance of those teams, you will generally find that those teams which aren't just a bunch of middle-aged white males, do have a more diverse, more inclusive structure around them, tend to perform better. So from an organisational perspective, go and have a look in terms of your own organisation as well, and I'm sure you'll find examples of where it will pockets, shall I say, of where it's working already.
Nice start. Thank you. All right. So if we think about, we all know that education has a huge role to play in it. And Rob, you talked about what you're doing in an organisation. Where do we think, how can we all be playing a part in that education, and what should education be doing briefly? I suppose different levels of education, if you think about school through to further and higher education and workplace education. Who wants to kick us off?
Well, I'll start. I suppose it's very, very early days for myself with my daughter. I've got a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And I think there's never too early for these conversations to start to be had. My daughter would go to school and tell somebody that mommy's job is to teach someone else how to fix things. So in her simple mind at that age, it's as simple as that. And it's something that if we allow the conversations to be had as early as possible, my daughter is growing up with that mindset that is okay and that is normal. She wouldn't realise that in most other households, the roles would probably be reversed. And I think it's just getting the conversation started as early as possible. My daughter started dancing, and she said, I don't want to do what everyone else wants to do. I want to do my own moves. So now she does karate and she does rugby. So it's just making sure that from the early years that people understand that all options are available to everybody. And the earlier we have those conversations, then when she moves into education, she will feel less threatened to pick something outside of the box and to move forward into an option, what she wants to do, and follow that and pursue it, and not feel like gender or anything else is going to be a barrier to stop her from doing it. And within developed training, all of the options are available to everybody here as well. So we do have less female candidates coming through, but that is just, as we know, across the board. But they're all supported when they get here, and they're given as the same fair or equal opportunities as everybody else. So I think it's just being a bit open-minded and taking it across a wider platform, I suppose, and just everybody you deal with, from however young they are, starting those conversations and then allowing it to continue through. We've got a lot of work to do from the bottom up, I suppose.
Nice.
Yeah, to follow on what Nicola's said as well, it's really good points. When I was at school, I'm sure times have changed slightly ever since then, but when I was at school, like, a normal thing was to see females as a teacher or nurse, and the natural thing is to see a male as an engineer. So kids growing up, they just think that's a normal job for them to do. Obviously nowadays there is more, like, we're promoting women in engineering and stuff, but the more that children see women in engineering and males in other naturally jobs dominated by females, like, it becomes more of a reality than a anomaly.
Yeah, just add two things to that. One, I think that kind of role modeling and that kind of, as you say, those celebrating women in engineering or women in senior leadership roles or whatever it is really important. I remember when I got my HR director role at Wales and West, I was walking down the office there where Rob's sitting now, and people like girl power, and I was like, didn't realize the impact that it had. It wasn't just the impact it had on me, but it was the impact it had on junior females in the organization, and not feeling afraid to celebrate others' successes and your own successes. And then for me, just going back to Chloe's point, really, and Nicola's, it's about, and I don't know what the answer to this is, it's just posing a question, is how do we influence careers advice given at school? Because typically they're not necessarily people, with all due respect to them, that have worked in industry and understand, you know, the challenges and the conversations that we're having. But how do we then, as industry, I suppose, support those career decisions and those career conversations that people are having, so that they are not, you know, sort of thinking in the traditional sense, as Nicola's just talked about, and that those options are left open until people can start to make their own decisions based on what's right for them.
I think one thing that everybody could simply do is make sure that if you've got local schools nearby, they all have careers. Most of them are looking for people to go in and talk about jobs to their year 10, year 9, year 12, 13. I know I've been a couple of times to my kids' schools, and to engage in that, because no matter who you are, to have those discussions and be there and tell your story. I think Nicola and Chloe, you're great examples of how you could, if you're not already doing it, go in there and tell those stories to those kids out there as a beginning, and educate the teachers as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Has anybody got any questions they want to pose to our panelists here today? Any experiences you might even want to share, or opinions? Feel free to use this time. I know we've overrun a bit, but it's been great because it's all fantastic stuff that we're talking about. If you haven't, I've got a couple. I think one of the things is about the role of mentors. How important do you think that is? And I suppose this is for Chloe and Nicola, because you'll have experienced that. How have mentors really helped you, or maybe hindered you at times as well? And what do they need to do better?
Yeah, so I sort of touched on that when I was speaking at the beginning. So when I became a project manager, I was issued a mentor. His name was Steve. He's very, very old school, like very old school. And I just got the feeling he didn't want me to be there. He didn't want me to be doing the role. Female should be whatever, you know what I mean? And it wasn't until sort of later on that he sort of saw like how much I wanted to learn, and I was wanting to get involved, and that me doing the role was no different than a male coming up and doing the role. And his mindset did change in time, but without his experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. And it's a shame, because I don't know what it's like at Wales and West, Rob, or other companies, but with SGN, there's a lot of the older school people, they're sort of retiring now, and there's such a gap in knowledge now between the likes of Steve and myself, and there's no real in between. So I'm lucky that I had him, but I feel like a lot of female project managers that are now coming up, they don't necessarily have a mentor that's as experienced as that. They're sort of learning off someone that's worked their way up like themselves. But I do think it is massively important to have someone that's got that depth of knowledge to learn from.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a full industry thing, isn't it? That unfortunately we've got an aging workforce that across the board, even for ourselves as with trainers and assessors, the people we rely on are, with all that depth of knowledge, are reaching retirement age. So it is a massive gap that needs to be filled. And I think, like Chloe says, I touched on it earlier as well, I've had very supportive mentors through my time, that thankfully the person I was put with to do my training and mentoring as an apprentice was very supportive, didn't treat me any differently to anybody else, and encouraged me. And then the person that was the specialist that was supposed to be signing everything off, like I said before, he didn't think that females could do the job, and thankfully I proved him wrong, and he did own it, and he corrected himself in that opinion. But it does make a huge difference, because if I'd been paired with that person from the beginning, then the journey could have been very different for me, because I could have been paired with him to do my training, and then that could have changed my whole experience of the whole process. So it definitely needs to be the right people in the right mentor roles. And like I say, we need to get as much of that knowledge as possible handed down as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. So we've had lots of really good conversations, and that has been the key takeaway anyway, that everybody said, you know, the great starting point is having conversations. Yes, we've started it here today, and thanks to everybody who's joined us, but now it's all up to us to go out and encourage those conversations. Now I suppose we can all be the drivers of change. Yes, we started it here, but each and every one of us, of you who've attended, please do start having those conversations, breaking down those barriers, reducing those fears. Yeah, and I think I'd encourage you to, this is going to be available to watch on demand. You can send it to your colleagues to have a look at. We'll be distilling some key takeaways that people will be able to share with people, some of those great stats that Sarah and Rob have shared in terms of, you know, actually the challenge, but also the great opportunity and the success that Wales and West have experienced. This is part of the webinar series from Radius Systems. We've got some other webinars that we've done, so you could check out those as well on demand, things about sustainability as well, more important big industry-wide issues that we're trying to address. Thank you to all of our panelists, Sarah, Rob, Helen, Nicola, Chloe. Really appreciated your time and your honesty and your insight. Thank you very much today, and thank you for everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Wraps us up.
Bye.
See you
for having
again
me.
next
Bye.
time. Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.